Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Research's seminar series on measuring progress and well-being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers. Today, we have Professor Martijn Berger, who will discuss workplace well-being. Before we get started, we are pleased to announce the dates of the next edition of the Measuring Progress annual workshop. The workshop will take a similar format as in previous years and occur on the 18th and 19th of June 2026. We have confirmed Andrew Oswald and Ida Kubaszewski as keynote speakers. Please look for a call for papers soon. You may also check our website for details. Back to today, Martijn will speak for around 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, and then address questions at the end, at which time please raise your virtual hands or post your questions in the chat. During the presentation, please keep your microphones muted. If you do have a clarifying question, you're welcome to chime in at any moment as well. As a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll be able to find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Now to introduce Professor Martijn Berger. Martijn is Academic Director at the Erasmus Happiness Economics Research Organization, often known as eHero, which is at the Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He is Professor of Economics in the Faculty of Management Studies at the Open University of the Netherlands, and visiting professor at the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. He obtained his PhD in economics from the Erasmus University Rotterdam. Most of his current research focuses on well-being economics, urban and regional economics, including geography of happiness, worker well-being, and institutional and social conditions for economic development. In addition, he is past president over the years 2023 to 2024 of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies, and editor-in-chief for the Journal of Wellbeing Economics. Without further ado, Martijn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you so much of having me here today, and thank you so much for attending. So today, I will not present the usual paper or the usual academic paper. I will present some work that we have done over the past 10 years at eHero on workplace well-being and human-centric organization. And that is work that is, on the one hand, rooted in academic research. So we use like a lot of academic theory and empirics to research well-being in organizations. But at the same time, it is also very much applied to research that we have done over the past years. So we are a research organization that has a social goal. We like to contribute to a greater happiness for a greater number of people. And we do that mainly by enabling people and organizations to make more informed choices for a better life or for a better workplace. So you can imagine that in organizations, like the academic research or the research that we do is not a goal in itself. It is basically used as a means to improve the well-being of people within that organization by just showing organizations on how they can improve that well-being. So that is what we use, is usually a combination of surveys and action-based research, where we try also to develop together with the organizations interventions to improve well-being. We don't really carry out the interventions ourselves. We mostly measure the effect of interventions where possible, but we advise organizations in a way what to do. And the narrative that I will talk about today is the narrative about a workplace well-being paradox and the human-centric organization. And that is some thing that we have witnessed over the past 10 years, that we did this kind of research, and over the past 14 years that eHero has existed. When we started with well-being in organizations of workplace happiness, people thought that we were crazy. So in the sense that they thought it was something very exotic to look at. Well, nowadays you see, and that is basically the first observation that we see over the past 10 to 15 years, a development that more and more organizations invest in workplace well-being. And if you look at the statistics that are around, so the inventarizations that have been made by consultancy companies or by researchers, then you see that, like most organizations nowadays, pay attention to the mental health, the physical health, but also financial health of employees. That if you look at the development of well-being strategies across time, you see typically that it also goes further back much longer. Already in the early 20th century, there were organizations that had like a well-being strategy, but these organizations were naturally more focusing on prevention harm at work, so making sure that people didn't die on the job, instead of really focusing on the mental health and like subjective well-being of people, also focusing on things on purpose and well-being, on meaning. However, if you look nowadays at like well-being strategies of companies, then you see that the majority in the world, and this is like a survey by the Deloitte group, you see that the majority also pays attention to the mental health. And so they have either a strategy that is comprehensive and integrated into the way they design work, and they also want the workforce experience to provide purpose and meaning, or it's a strategy that focuses not only on physical health but also on mental and financial health of employees. If you look at individual level interventions, so if you interventions like the offering of mindfulness classes or wellness apps or workshops, then it's nowadays already an 8 billion industry. So the companies spend about 8 billion annually on initial level initiative. If you take the whole corporate wellness market, and then you would come at an estimate of around 64 billion annually that is spent. So that is a lot of money that goes towards the well-being of employees. If you see also the development over time, you see that this employee well-being and the focus on it is becoming more and more prominent in organizations. Organizations have increasingly a standalone well-being strategy. The well-being is also increasingly on the senior leaders' agendas. Line managers are increasingly bought in on the importance of well-being, and also employees are increasingly keen to engage in well-being initiatives. And so you see that in the majority of the cases here, people are positive to paying attention to employee well-being. If you look also like the buy-in for companies, of course, they want their employees to be happy, but like still there is also organizations are also more willing to invest in it because they see also the benefits of investing into employee well-being. So if you look at the older models that are around already in the 90s, the literature in business was speaking about a service profit change, so that employee satisfaction would result in more customer satisfaction, which in turn would result in more customer loyalty, and that would then also increase revenue growth and profits. And that is also like where the first like ideas about like getting really the employee well-being and the mental well-being part into the business of the organization. That was like more recently spurred by also evidence that has been mainly based on like a lot of Gallup surveys and some academic literature that has been around that also looked into the causal evidence that is out there. If we look at correlations, then we generally see a positive correlation between employee well-being and productivity. If you look at Gallup, which studied 100,000 of employees in hundreds of companies in the United States, then you see that in companies, the companies in which the employees are happier, so what Gallup does in this graph is comparing the top 25% companies in terms of employee well-being with the 25% worst scoring companies. And then you see that in the best scoring companies, there's 37% less absenteeism. There is a lower turnover, so they are better able to retain staff. There are less safety incidents, there are less quality defects, and you also see that customer ratings, productivity, and profitability are higher. This has been backed up by some causal evidence. I think most famous here is the paper by Clemens Bellet et al. That looked at the productivity in call centers. But there are getting more studies out there that try to isolate the relationship between well-being and productivity, also running specifically from well-being to productivity. That therefore organizations like, is there also a reason to invest, is also underlined by like findings that you will find in study by, for example, the Neve, that compares companies that are very similar in the type of activities that they do, but still if they are like, there's a big gap in terms of well-being between these companies. So in terms of job satisfaction, purpose at work, or happiness at work, which means that there are also like things that organizations can do. And of course, you can understand that employee well-being in some types of jobs is happier or is higher evaluated than in some other types of jobs. You can imagine that like a manager is on average happier than a garbage man. But at the same time, if you look at organizations that involve similar type of work, then you can still see a lot of differences in terms of employee well-being, which also means that there is a possibility for change, and there's a possibility to invest in well-being that has potentially larger payoffs. And that you see that companies like are increasingly turning attention to well-being. You also see is also evidenced by the big four jumping into the employee well-being field, where I think that 10, 15 years ago, this was unimaginable. Now, Deloitte, KPMG, McKinsey, Ernst & Young, and PricewaterhouseCoopers have all employee well-being programs and try to consult like the companies on like well-being. And if you look also at the corporate wellness market, and it's admittedly very hard to measure because different market research agencies come with different measures, you see that this market is increasing. The estimates like, yeah, are somewhere between 60 billion and 130 billion in a couple of years. But I think that the bottom line is that the market, for this kind of employee well-being consultancy and interventions is increasing massively. It's growing. The claims are also like big that a lot of companies make. If you look at Deloitte claims that research shows that there is almost 5 points return for every £1 invested in employee programs. There are some smaller companies also making a claim. Some companies that invest in workplace mental health see a 4 times return on average. There is that every £1 spent on well-being initiatives can return over £10 in benefits. So these are huge claims. Some say that they are based on research. For some, I couldn't find the underlying research. For others, I could find like some research that is around that's mostly correlational. But we should also be very wary of the claims that these companies make. Also, the experience over the past 10 years is that it's very hard to improve well-being in companies, and that it's a process and that it requires cultural and behavioral change. And certainly not with one intervention you can change or improve the well-being of the employees. And yeah, if that is also like the second problem, the market is increasing. You see more and more like players also on this market. But at the same time, and then we also gradually come to the workplace well-being paradox, we see an increase in stress and burnout. So job satisfaction or engagement or employee well-being does not seem to increase, despite more and more money is spent on this employee well-being by organizations. And if you look at like what is going on there, so what is the underlying statistics that are out there, then you see it also back in global trends on human capital by the same Deloitte. So you see an increasing work stress leading to worse mental health. We see people feel the threat of technologies, which would cause lower subjective well-being, but also the fact that people have the feeling that they should be always on, or that they are afraid, certainly in some countries, that employers digitally monitor their performance and behavior at work. And also the hybrid work would result in a lack of connection. If we look at more general statistics, my apologies for the Dutch in this graph, but it's from Statistics Netherlands. You see the growing absenteeism in the Netherlands, especially after COVID, and that absenteeism is part also caused by increasing stress and burnout, and it's something that is very expensive, which, by the way, apart from being expensive, it also increases the need for organizations to more focus on the employee well-being. So on average, they estimated that a sickness day per employee is on average cost 250 euros per day, and that is the lower end of the estimation. So it's usually between 250 and 450 euros per day is what a sick employee costs in the Netherlands. So yeah, add it up when you see that absenteeism is increasing. On average in the Netherlands, it's now around 5% absenteeism, but in some sectors like the healthcare sector, it is at the moment 7%. And so it's putting a lot of stress also on this sector. We see it also back in different statistics. So we see it back in the percentage of people with burnout symptoms. If you look at the right-hand graph in the Netherlands, you see that that figure is increasing. So it had increased since the 2015s. If you look further back at this development that has much been going on for a longer time, but has accelerated recently. At the same time, you also see especially the subjective well-being, so the life satisfaction of young people in the Netherlands declining, especially after the COVID start. It has been catching up a little bit, but it's still much lower than before COVID times. And you especially see it among young people. If you look at the type of symptoms, then usually people report feeling empty, feeling tired in the morning, feeling emotionally depleted, feeling exhausted because of work. And in the end, we have to conclude that putting these two observations together, you'll end up with a situation that there is more and more attention paid to employee well-being and more money spent on employee well-being, but there is a contradiction between the increasing focus on the well-being and in the workplace and an increasing high levels of stress and burnout experienced by many workers, and also especially the lower life satisfaction of young employees. So, what is going on? How can we explain the paradox? And that is also what we try to uncover in the studies that we did with the employees. So the first time, it is important to stress that, although people feel bad at work, it's also many non-work related reasons play a role, or why well-being is not increasing despite the many investments made. So part of the reasons for burnout are non-work related. So you also can think about things related to performance pressure, which is more in a social sphere, uncertainty in life. So no permanent contracts anymore. There's also a lot of social pressure, social comparisons, And also, if you want to change that, this also requires some behavior and cultural change within a society and organizations. And like a lot of these factors are perhaps not in the sphere of influence of an organization. If you look at like the decreasing life satisfaction of young adults in the Netherlands, so people between 18 and 25 years, where you see this decrease, there are many like domains in the lives of these people that are lower evaluated, yeah, let's say 10, 12 years ago than they are nowadays. So nowadays, the young people are less satisfied with housing, but also with their free time and social life, which is mostly outside the realm of work. But they are also like dissatisfied with, or more dissatisfied with daily activities, and they have more financial works, which is like, of course, related also to work. If you look at the causes of deterioration of youth mental health in general, it's a very complex story which requires a complete seminar on its own. There has been some interesting literature studies on this. Um, Admittedly, not every aspect that is like mentioned here has received that much attention in the empirics, and not like all of the reasons outlined here are well enough empirically supported. But if you look at the literature, and especially in the literature overview by Valkenburg and colleagues, you would say that there are like 15 reasons can be found in the literature why mental health would be declining. And so, while the most often cited reason is the decline of religion, which may reduce shared purpose in community, but that is also in combination with a rise of individualism, which emphasizes personal choice, but can also remove clear rules and expectations people rely on for stability. There's also a growing focus on achievement, status, and wealth, which may further harm well-being, especially when young people cannot meet like unrealistic standards that there are in society. But at the same time, there's also another group of explanations that highlight also different definitions and perceptions of mental health, which has changed since the 1960s, and which might also explain the kind of pattern that we see. And so, since the 1960s, more conditions have been recognized, and also awareness has increased, and stigma has been declined. This also makes it easier to talk about mental health issues. And additional cases, that can has influenced the decline are the reducing or reduction of free social play, so kids being kept more in the house, the increasing concerns about the future, different parenting styles, but also like the increasing mental health issues among parents. So if we look at this issue, or this supposedly paradox, we should also take in, and that's the bottom line, that there are also potential reasons for this paradox that can be attributed to the non-work context. But it's still you would think like, if mental health is such all under stress, also in the workplace, and well-being is under stress, well-being programs should be able to help. If you see that like $8 billion is invested in individualized intervention, so then you would also think, yes, there are more job demands maybe nowadays. Work might be more busy, maybe there is more pressure, but at the same time, these interventions should also provide more job resources for employees to deal with this stress, and basically counteract the reduction in well-being. But then you also see some interesting patterns again. So most companies, yes, they offer something to employees, but also employees are hardly using these interventions, or using them to a very limited extent. So if you look at the statistic on the left, you see that most organizations offer something on physical health, financial health, and also emotional well-being, but at the same time, the only employees only a few employees report using them. If you look at the effectiveness of well-being programs, like the consultancy companies painted a very rosy picture. But if you dive in the academic literature, but also personally from my own experience in the companies, has been a very limited evaluation of well-being interventions. So we know that about 60% of the companies never really tested what they did actually worked on the work floor. Also, the interventions that were tested on effectiveness, you can see that the effectiveness of programs is really up to discussion. So we know that 50 to 70% of the programs around employee well-being does not really have the intended effect. It's also not that they do much harm to employees, but they also don't increase the well-being of the employees, and certainly not in the longer run. There are several problems there. It's our top-down programs, so it's the idea that one program fits all. While happiness is very individualized, and what works for one person does not necessarily work for another person. Take, for example, mindfulness course might work perfectly for some people, but for other people, it doesn't really sort out any effect. And if you then also look at like surveys that have been done in the literature on the individual interventions, then you will also see that on average these individual interventions much fail. And so this $8 billion industry on average doesn't have a lot of effect on the average employee well-being. Doesn't mean that some employees can't profit from it. You also see that there is a lot of uncertainty about like the effect size, but for most of the intervention types that are presented here, so interventions around resilience, so dealing with adversaries, mindfulness, relaxation, coaching, time management, but also well-being apps, they don't really have a very large, let alone a significant effect on mental well-being, life satisfaction, or job satisfaction, and here we're also controlling for the likelihood of program participation. If you look at some other of the meta-analysis that have been around in related fields, you basically come to consensus that is out there, so that workplace interventions can potentially enhance worker well-being, but effect sizes are small. There are some evidence that the individual's interventions work on average worst, that the interventions that address our organization broad work better than the individual interventions, and also that given also the huge range and variety of interventions, and also that implementation quality plays a role, it is difficult to find really out what works for whom and what type of interventions are really effective. What we also know is that the longer term effects of interventions are generally unknown. Usually, if there's an effect size measurement, it's usually in a few months, maximally after the intervention is done. So what we try to do as a hero is work with 10 organizations on employee well-being, do interventions, measuring effect, and what we learned from our research, and also in our research, a lot of interventions failed. I would dare to say that the majority of interventions failed, but we also took that as like a challenge to find out why do they fail. Because by learning also why don't some things work, we can also try to improve that in the past and design better interventions for organizations, or basically warn them maybe not to buy for so much money interventions, while some things are not some minimum conditions are not met in the organization to have these interventions work in a successful way. What we learned from basically the Alliance and from the research is that there are many, many reasons why programs and interventions can fail. And it's in part, it's the quality of the intervention that has been suggested in the literature. Things that are tested out in a lab with students do not necessarily work very well in the field. But there are also other reasons out there, why interventions don't, work and don't increase employee well-being. So what we see in organizations is senior management don't give priority, don't give resources, don't give time for interventions, then it will also be very unlikely that interventions will be successful. And so what you also see that is that if they don't prioritize well-being, and we see with senior management that well-being is not unimportant, but other things are more important, certainly in commercial companies where the focus is more on profit and efficiency. And you would see that the focus is on different things than employee well-being. And we also see then the lack of line manager support. If line managers don't support like well-being interventions, then they will also not become part of like the culture of a team or an organization. What we also see sometimes is a lack of engagement of employees. Some senior management being very enthusiastic, but employees not, because they had to come up with interventions, for example, and then they thought, but now you say the problem is with us, that we are not happy enough. And often employees already had bad experiences with previous programs that tried to improve their well-being. They were also unsuccessful. They started and never finished. And for that reason, the program or intervention really didn't take off. We also see lack of cooperation between departments. And also what we see is that many of the interventions that are listed here were also like tested out in our programs. But if you look carefully, these are also always like interventions that try to get rid of like stress or burnouts. They don't really focus on addressing the underlying cause, but they are mostly focusing on treating the symptoms. And of course, you can try to get rid of stress, but if you don't get rid of the thing that caused the stress, then it's also very unlikely that it wouldn't come back in the future. If you look at the overviews, that what we found, it aligns what is found in the literature also on the failure of interventions, which is now like this literature is steadily increasing. So we see that, especially with big organizations, also a lot of programs are known to employees. So what happens is that central HR buys in programs and then treat it as a kind of a first aid kit. So if somebody has stress, we have this certain type of intervention for you. But it's also not like broadly like advocated in the companies often that you can use these type of programs. What we also see is that companies don't really listen well to employees' needs. So like what we also see that the programs within many companies don't align with the needs of the employees. Organizations, managers, higher management often think what employees need. But if you also look at the differences between employees' needs, what managers think employees need versus what employees actually need, you see that there's a huge gap between those two. There's also and that also doesn't really help in a way that the right interventions get delivered, an entire industry that profits from quick short-term solutions. And the quick short-term solutions are focused often on treating the symptoms. And this industry is not necessarily selling employee well-being. They're selling a particular intervention, and an intervention that is often, in their view, a solution to all the problems that there are in the company. What you also see is that the lack of support and blame shifting we talked about, and what we also see, and that is also a problem, that there is in most companies no data-driven approach. There's very little evaluation, so there's also not really kept track of what works and what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. So how to move forward? So in our view, and that is like after 10 years of research, we come to the conclusion that there's still a lot to be done in the field of employee well-being, but that also perhaps requires a different approach than the approach outlined earlier, where you have interventions that lead to higher employee well-being. That's perhaps not the way to go. It seems tempting, it seems to be an easy fix, but it doesn't really improve the employee well-being, because employee well-being, on the face of it, you need behavioral and cultural change within organizations, and that they maybe perhaps takes 5 years to realize. But you can move forward in a way of doing things around employee well-being in a kind of different way. So make interventions more personalized, so that it really fit the needs of the employees, focusing more on team and organization-based interventions, focusing more on interventions that do not treat symptoms, but are really trying to treat the underlying cause that are most strongly related to employee well-being. Also involve the employee more in decision making, listen to employees, where you should also take in, it does not only matter what you do, but also how you do it. And that is also really involving the employee. If you think about leadership, it plays a very important role at many different layers. And good leadership, in my view, tries to support the psychological needs of employees. So leadership should not force or isolate or ignore, but it should try to facilitate, connect, and to empower. And then it's also possible to create different kinds of culture within a company. But maybe then companies should also change where they are focused on. Are they primarily focused on well-being, or are they primarily focus on efficiency or customer satisfaction? Or can you really connect the two? If you look at such an organization that would satisfy this kind of world, it would be a kind of human-centric organization. And this type of concept is getting track in the field of business organization studies. One model is the model by Boré, and which has the basics of the human-centric organization, and that is an organization that values trust, connection, satisfaction, and fulfillment. It puts the employee in the center. In that sense, it's human-centric. You want to have trust, because if trust is lacking, there's no space to make your own choices, so it satisfies the psychological need of autonomy. Connection is about being recognized, seen, and valued as a human being, with personal experiences that also satisfy the connectivity, and also a basic psychological need that we have as human beings. You have a company where satisfaction is the center, so at the center, so that you're feeling that your work contributes to something that matters for you, so that's also purpose. And there's also competence or mastery as a psychological need. And the purpose as the fourth is also related to fulfillment. And so that there is the question why you work is at the center. It's important to have meaning out of work. So to finish, so if you look, and this is what we developed in eHero, and especially this work by Emma Pleging, one of my colleagues at eHero, we call it the rocket of human-centric organization. And that is what you can start within organizations. And we use this as a tool to start a discussion about well-being in organizations. And what the rocket basically says is that some conditions need to be set aside in order to create this happy employee culture. And so an organization should have clear on why they are on this earth. So what is their larger purpose? Why do they organize themselves? And also in that sense, the purpose of employees should align at least to a little bit with the purpose of organizations. It's also about creating a safe structure within organizations. There's a lot of to do about like psychological safety. And so the question, how can we organize ourselves pleasantly, but also knowing that we can't control everything. It's about having good work conditions, having good agreements with each other to can fall back on. That also creates a sense of trust within an organization. Then there's the question like, who is this organization for? Equal work doesn't necessarily mean equal outcomes, but it means that all people are equally valuable and have a right to be to respectful and dignified treatment. It's also about listening sincerely and allowing yourself to be influenced by others. So that also means a dialogue between employees and management instead of an extreme top-down relationship. And in the end, if all these conditions are met and the rocket can take off, it is also good to discuss what do we well in this organization. So that people in the end also use their talents and interests to contribute to the organization's greater purpose or shared responsibility. Well, few organizations work in this way, but I think that also as academics, we can help to bring this discussion forward also by providing inspiration to organizations. I think that employee well-being is something important. It's not only from a business perspective, but also because work is still a very important part of life. But like improving well-being, what we learned is not a matter of a single intervention. It's a matter of changing behavior and culture. And that means a very different approach than the industry is currently pursuing and what we have done until now. So with this, I would like to stop and open the discussion.
Thank you very much, Martijn. Nice timing, and to finish on the rocket is great. Let's open it up to questions. You can raise your virtual hand or write in the chat. If you raise your hand, we can call on you. You can unmute yourself, and we get started. I don't see a question just yet, so perhaps I'll start where we just left off, Martijn. These human-centric organizations. You said at the end, not many companies are doing it. And so those that are, do you know why they're doing it? Part of what we talked about before was that in the 90s, companies were doing this because they saw that there was improved outcomes for them in a, let's say, a financial way. Does this human-centric organization improve their bottom line? How do we change organizations from a profit orientation to a human orientation?
Yeah, that's very difficult, because it's in the essence also on like what is valued in an organization and why is an organization on earth. And many commercial organizations simply say we are there for our shareholders to make profit. And then many of them still want to pay attention to employee well-being in order to reduce absenteeism, to attract employees to their companies, also to increase productivity, but they're not necessarily interested in making employees happy for the sake of the employees' happiness. And that is also the difficult thing, because like what we discovered is that it is not like about one intervention, it's about creating a culture and changing behavior. And if you want to do that, you should also have at least in part as purpose to be generally interested in that employee and increase the well-being and care about the well-being of an employee that goes beyond the mere financial interest in that well-being. So you see that in commercial organizations, for that reason, it's also more difficult, I think, to increase like employee well-being in a very sustainable way. Often they work on interventions, they think it's fun. It might in some teams work, but it's very difficult to spread throughout the whole organization. We see more success, I think, in schools, hospitals, healthcare organizations, in which the focus is not necessarily on profitability, certainly not in the Netherlands, but it's on client satisfaction. And they also believe if the employee is happy, the client is happy, and you can attend better to clients. But still, the main focus is the client and not the employee. There are a few organizations that put more the employee, who say it's both client satisfaction and employee satisfaction. I think the schools are increasingly doing that. At the same time, you see here that in smaller organizations and newer organizations, it's easier to do. If an organization is already longer in place and there is already a certain culture there, it's very hard to change that culture. But if it's a startup and the startup also starts with putting the employee at the center stage, then it also has a much better chance also to succeed and develop such a culture.
Makes sense. Thanks. Francesco, you're next, and then Chiara, you'll be after Francesco.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Martijn. It was a fantastic presentation, very clear. I really appreciate and enjoying a lot of food for thought. The question I want to ask you is about this this well-being paradox, right? And I wonder if it comes from a conflict between short and long run. For instance, a well-being economy is one in which return on investments are to be expected in the long run, whereas we're still running an economy where companies are investing money now and want results tomorrow at the latest. And I wonder if there is this conflict. So the company has an incentive to hire the consultant.
Yeah.
You got it.
So what is actually happening, what I think is happening, but it's mostly from my own experience in the company and not so much based on the data that we have, is that they're hoping for quick fixes. They're hoping for interventions, and then they find out that it's a long-run process for which we, by the way, nowadays like born the companies. And then, they think it's too much of a risk to invest in the well-being and that it doesn't pay off, even if we show the figures that I showed in the beginning on Gallup. At the same time, and I'm thinking that it's also the sense of urgency that plays a role. So the more urgent the employee well-being problem is, so the more urgent the absenteeism problem is, the more the organizations also want to invest in it, even if they realize it's for the longer run. You also see like there are other type of investments that companies do. Investments in AI, they also realize that it's probably for the longer run before it's really profitable, but they still do it. But there is more sense of urgency there that they have to do it, or at least some companies, in order to survive. So if companies, but maybe we also need to back up, they need to understand in order for survival or to gain market power, they need to really invest in it, and otherwise they're gone. They may be also more willing to invest in it in the longer run. But for now, they don't, because it's indeed they are focusing on the short run, and this is not something that you can realize in the short run. None of the companies that we really investigated over the years managed to get an increased employee well-being in the short run.
Yep, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Martijn. So we have now several questions in the chat, as well as a couple who've raised their hands. So let's try to keep question and answers short, everyone. Thank you. Chiara, go ahead.
Thank you, Martijn. My question is linked to what you just said. So I'll be quick. So do you think that this prevalence of short-termism and shallow solutions, say, is typical of certain type of companies, which you partially have already answered, typical of certain structure of our economies? And do you have or you are aware of any cross-country result that might point to country economic structure? I'm thinking about, say, countries in which the idea of the social value of the enterprise is stronger. You would be able to find a different result rather than countries that give countries in which the economy is more as a main objective as just to maximize the shareholder value. Thank you.
It would actually be great to do. I know that there are these kind of studies are done in multiple countries. I'm not aware of. We at least did not ourselves do a cross-country study. If you look at, are some companies hoping for more quick fixes than others? I think yes. So I think that if you look at the more organizations that are really profit oriented, they're hoping for more or more oriented to short, quick term fixes than hospitals and schools, which are more willing to work really on a plan and with a gradual rollout and different steps. And if you also look at the organizations that spent like a longer time with us, we also had organizations that after 1 year they quit because it didn't work out, which is also fine to discover. But like the organizations that stayed longest with us is a school and an social housing corporation, so which have also like a little bit longer term orientation in that regard. So I think that the type of company that matters, and I think it would be very interesting to look at the differences across countries and whether that national context matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Martijn. I'm going to collect a couple of questions from the chat. So Fabiola asks about work satisfaction, saying that there are many determinants: salary, working time, etc. How do you evaluate those other aspects for work satisfaction? And then,
can I answer them one by one?
Yeah.
So like,
yeah,
my brain is not that good.
Yeah, no problem.
No, so that is a valid point. So in our research, when we do research together with companies, we don't only measure job satisfaction, life satisfaction. We also we have like 11 domains that we distinguish related to the work context, ranging from whether people have purpose in work to how whether they find their job interesting, how they value their colleagues, the leadership, but also salary. And what we try to do is through regression analysis, dominance analysis, find out which of these factors are important. And we generally advise companies to focus on those aspects that score a little bit lower but are highly correlated with well-being. And interestingly, also these factors tend to match with the factors that employees want to focus on. So we also ask employees like an open question, where you do want the company to invest in, and they usually mention the things that score lower and are highly correlated. So yes, we look beyond that, and that is from there on. You don't really get like we help organizations making a plan, and numbers are just numbers in the end, we say, but they help at least to start a discussion where to focus on, because there are indeed many things you can focus on.
Great. We have, unfortunately, I think maybe too many questions to get to all of them, but we'll do our best. Margarita Casau asks, based on your experience, which interventions work best and in which context?
Well, interventions that work best that tackle the underlying root causes of, for example, stress, and in a sustainable way. So I have a nice example from a healthcare organization where we worked in. A lot of people experienced their stress with regard to the time schedules, because it turned out that a lot of parents with kids were not able to bring their kids to school in the morning because the work already started at 8 o'clock while school started at 8:30. So a very easy intervention there is around flexible work schedules, here allowing people with kids to only start their shifts at 9. So making that also possible. And that proved to be also working, at least for that team. And of course, it's not always easy to implement, since everybody in the team needs to agree, but in principle, interventions that tackle the causes of why people are not feeling well at work are the interventions that work best in the long run.
Great, that makes sense. So we have Paul. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Don't hear you, Paul. Are you there?
Great, thank you, Martijn. That was a fantastic talk. I'll just make a 2 or 3 very brief points and I want to respond to them. Your point about so there's a parallel with stuff about schools going on here, I think, and I would say that in schools, teachers are having difficulties delivering life skills because they haven't been trained or enabled. And I think there's something similar going on in some of these workplaces. Actually, it's not a long-term, short-term thing. It's actually a different kind of mindset that managers don't yet have.
It's a different way of managing.
Second,
that
related,
is needed.
HR. Yes, a different sort of conception of the relationship. Secondly, and related, closely related, I think a lot of HR departments just do this as butt covering exercises. They don't have a clue as to what's really going on, and they need to be upgraded. And then I mentioned the point about line managers. I think they need to be incentivized and trained, and a completely different cadre approach to work needs to be taken. And then finally, I'd invite you to say a little bit more. Actually, I thought it was a great presentation, but I think you could have brought out a little bit more the whole digitization and what that is doing to workplaces and social interactions and relations, because I think you have to completely almost rewrite the job satisfaction literature as a result of hybrid and at-home working.
Oh, that is a long story, because indeed the digitization does a lot. So, but in many regards. So if you look at social media, which amplifies social comparisons, which also reduces well-being, but you also have a very different way of working. So the hybrid working, which means that people work much more on their own, occasionally come to the office, but still want to meet people in the office. If you look at why people come at the office, it's not to work in a concentrated way, or at least most not. But come there to meet colleagues from both a social and work-related point of view. Offices are not always suited for those type of activities. But admittedly, that is it's indeed related also to maybe decreased worker well-being, but it's part of the story. The comment about HR, I completely agree. I think that a problem in a lot of big companies is that they centralized HR. So what you see in the companies that HR you originally found also in a lot of divisions or in a lot of locations, and at some point they centralized HR and they lost touch with the base. And then you get the problem that they buy in a lot of well-being programs, which are supposedly working, but they indeed they don't have a clue what works for whom. And that is a problem. And then we have indeed what you mentioned first, the different types of leadership. Yes, the leader has become more and more a coach in a way, and in a way also supporting the psychological needs of people requires a different type of leadership than what we have been used to up till now. It requires a different kind of behavior. You need to support, facilitate, connect people, and maybe you then also need to select leadership in a very different way than we do now. We often select leadership in a way that people do their job well and then they are promoted to the next level. But maybe they are not selected on the right qualities to lead a team of people. You should look way more at the social skills that people have. And people that are good at their job are not necessarily good in leading a crowd. So also in the selection of future leaders, we could do some better things there. Apart from the training, and the question is with also, you see the skills that were needed to the leadership, can everything be trained or not?
Thanks, Martijn. So we are at time. Is it okay with you if we stay for a few extra minutes?
Yes, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, just a few extra. So Chris Barrington Lee asks about mission-oriented or not-for-profit organizations. There was some recent report showing tough times in such organizations in Canada. So is there anything special you have to say about these organizations?
What do you mean with mission-oriented? Chris, maybe you can chip in.
Yeah. They may be set up for specific purposes, but maybe you can specify more clearly. Chris, you there? Oh, and there he is. Go ahead, Chris.
I meant not-for-profit organizations.
Oh, not-for-profit organizations. Yes, so these non-for-profit organizations, they are usually better in focusing on employee well-being and trying to make that part of their culture. I think the biggest problem we have until now is if getting this foot at the ground at profit organizations, and we really tried at some larger Dutch for-profit organizations, so a big bank and flying airline company, and there it was proved to be very difficult. So the share, it is also it's not only about it's about which kind of stakeholder has most power within the organization. I think that plays a very important role in also putting employees in the center of the organization, or creating human-centric organizations. And these power dynamics and also how we can change that in for-profit organizations is something to further discover. But I think that power dynamic makes it very difficult at the moment to also make the change toward a human-centric organization in for-profit. In non-for-profit, it's much easier, actually.
Thank you.
We have a question from Will Fleming asking about, are you going to publish your findings?
I hope, at least in a white paper. So this is more a narrative, and in that sense, more a viewpoint, not an academic article. I usually have this also use this as inspirational story within organizations when I'm invited to talk about employee well-being and what to do about it. At least this is part of the story. But at some point, I will write it down in the coming year.
Great. I think we'll all look forward to seeing that. Ashley asks one minor methodological question about the weak or null relationship between intervention and results. To what extent could the paradox be explained by the increase in salience about well-being? So people put more emphasis on well-being, and then it's harder for the interventions to work.
In part, yeah. Certainly, I think what a problem is when I've seen organizations in my practice that really shouted from the roof, we're going to invest in employee well-being, and that created expectations, and it also changed the reference point in that regard, and that might play a role here. At the same time, we also see if you have a general, at the same time, it's only part of the story. Because what we also did when evaluating interventions is we also asked people, did the intervention work or not for you? And then we also see that if we interview people or ask them a survey question, so then you also see that a lot of these interventions did not do a lot for people. So people quit after a few days, or they feel that, it was nice to try, but it's nothing for me. So you see that, in part, you see an effect indeed of salience, but also a combination with high expectations that people have. Many of the interventions claim to do a lot. that also doesn't help. But in the end, it's not surprising that we see hardly any effect of the individual level interventions out there.
One last question, Martijn. Thank you for staying. It's an interesting question about the societal frame of reference. To what extent does the local institutional context shape corporate well-being strategies? And for example, will a multinational corporation adjust their practice across different welfare regimes, specifically when comparing offices in high welfare versus low welfare states?
Oh, that's a good question. Not a lot aware of like a lot of research in there, but of course the companies, I've worked with like a multinational company where there was attention for this issue, so that they understand that if you work in the Netherlands, you work with Dutch people, and that you have to attend to slightly different needs compared to when working in, for example, India, in this case, or in the United States. And so organizations realize that they also try to mainly adjust for that by the type of manager that they put also out there, also often more local, that is also linked to the local culture. At the same time, you see that a US company in the Netherlands is still a US company in many ways. So you don't really, not always can get the culture out of like where the company originally came from. Because like it's also like in let's just say in the DNA of the company. But companies companies realize they need to pay attention to it. To what extent they're able to do it, it's the question, and that might also be the reason why some multinationals are part of it disappear from a country at some point again, because they don't really fit in.
Thank you very much, Martijn. This was informative and interesting. I think I'll be going back to the recording. If you want to close this off with any final words, otherwise we'll shut down.
Well, thank you for attending. I very much enjoyed it. And thank you for having me today, Kelsey and Francesca.